Progress invoicing is one of the best tools in QuickBooks Online for managing large projects, especially when you don't want to wait until the very end to get paid. The business can cover the cost of supplies and subcontractors throughout the project, and the customers can make smaller payments, and it encourages the business to finish a quality project. In today's video, you'll learn how to turn on progress invoicing in QuickBooks Online, different ways to use this feature to bill your customers, and how to run a report to keep track of what is still owed. Let's start by turning on progress invoicing by clicking on the gear icon and then account and settings. Then we'll click on sales and scroll down to progress invoicing. We'll click on the pencil icon and we're going to turn on create multiple partial invoices from a single estimate, save, and then done. In QuickBooks Online, you have to start with an estimate in order to use progress invoicing. This doesn't change your income or reports. It just gives you a way to bill against the estimate over time. In our example, we have an HVAC company that is installing a new heating and air conditioning unit for a customer for $12,000. We'll create the estimate by clicking on Create and then Estimate. And our customer is Austin Davis. The estimate date was January 7th, and it's only good for 2 weeks, so the expiration date is January 21st. The service is HVAC installation for $12,000, and then we'll save. On January 9th, Austin accepted the estimate, so now we can start invoicing against it. So let's mark it as accepted by clicking on the drop-down arrow and then mark accepted, and he accepted it on January 9th of 2026, and then we'll click OK, and then we'll convert it to an invoice. Here we can select how we want to invoice our customer. We can invoice for the total remaining amount, which is $12,000. We can invoice for a certain percentage or amount of the total invoice, or apply a certain percentage or amount to each line of the invoice. In this case, we're going to split the invoice into 4 parts. First, 10% is invoiced to start the project after the contract is signed, so that will be for $1,200. Second, 40% is invoiced for the delivery of the equipment and beginning the installation. That will be for $4,800. Third, 30% is invoiced once the installation is completed. That will be for $3,600. And finally, 20% is invoiced once a final inspection has passed. That will be for $2,400. In this example, I'm not going to change the invoice dates. However, you would change the date to reflect when you send each invoice to your customer. We're going to use percentages to invoice the client. So the initial invoice will be for 10%. You can see that when we enter the percentage, QuickBooks Online automatically calculates the invoice amount. The same applies if we enter the amount first. QuickBooks Online then calculates the percentage of the total invoice. So we'll create our first invoice. Here we can see that we're invoicing the customer $1,200 or 10% of $12,000. Now let's create the remaining 3 invoices. So we'll save and close. Then we'll click on the drop-down arrow and select Invoice. You notice that his estimate shows up on the right side of the screen. That's what we want to see. So we'll click Add. This time we're going to invoice for 40% for the delivery of the equipment and beginning the installation, and then we'll copy the invoice. So here we have an invoice for $4,800, and then we'll save and close. Let's run a report to see how much of the project has been invoiced and what is the remaining balance. So we'll click on Reports and then Standard Reports, and then we'll search for Estimates and Progress Invoicing Summary by Customer. We can see our customer Austin, the status of the project is accepted. The total project amount is $12,000, and we have invoiced $6,000. This report is especially helpful for bookkeepers and business owners because it shows in one place what's been billed and what's still left to invoice. Now let's create the third invoice for Austin. So we'll click on Create and then Invoice, and then we'll add his name, Austin Davis, and then we'll add the estimate. You notice that the remaining total is being reduced by the amount we've already invoiced the client. So now we have $6,000 left to invoice Austin. This third invoice will be for 30% now that the HVAC installation is completed, and then we'll copy the invoice. Then we'll save anew. We'll add the customer, Austin Davis, and then we'll add the estimate. And the final invoice will be for the remaining 20% since the final inspection was passed. Notice what happens if I enter an amount more than what is left of the remaining balance. So let's say if I change this to $3,500 and then copy to invoice, I'm going to X out of this customization section. QuickBooks Online only adds the remaining $2,400 to the invoice. However, you can manually adjust the amount on the actual invoice. Let's say there was an additional $900 added because of a project scope change. So we'll increase this final invoice, and I'm going to click on the dollar sign so I can enter the dollar amount. So we're going to increase this to $3,300. And QuickBooks Online lets us know that this exceeds the estimate. This adjustment increases income beyond the original estimate, which is exactly what you want when a project scope changes. And then we'll save and close. After you've invoiced for the total estimate amount, the status automatically changes to converted. Once you understand progress invoicing, managing large projects in QuickBooks Online becomes much more predictable and much less stressful. If you want more QuickBooks Online guidance you can trust, subscribe to this channel and use our extensive tutorial library for reference whenever you need it.